Welcome everyone to our latest webinar. If you're not aware, well, let me start. My name is Jennifer Berthelot. I'm the Communications Director for the Louisiana Office of Tourism. This is part of our webinar series that we have been putting on since really the beginning of, or the end of fall of last year, in response to COVID-19 and looking to help the industry be ready for comeback and get us back to one of our preeminent destination in the US. So we have been doing quite a few of these. We have them every Tuesday at 11. They are all recorded, you'll see, and we post up all of the recordings on our industry portal. The URL for our portal is louisianatravel.com/industry. That's where you can find all of the recordings, but also the ones to come. So we have some additional webinars that we're doing in the future. We're working on keeping this schedule going so that we can keep sharing some best practices, new research like what we're going to have today, and anything that could help benefit the industry with all of our partners. And when I say our partners, I mean everybody. We have a lot of CVBs here today, but we also have a lot of attractions here today, which I'm very excited about. These webinars are free for anyone. So if you are a CVB or you're an attraction, or you're a hotel, they're free for you. We want everybody to be able to use these resources to be ready to welcome visitors back as we start to get COVID under control. You'll see on our industry portal a lot of other resources and opportunities that are also free, including our Google Recovery Toolkit. That is something we purchased into with Miles Partnership. It offers a variety of best practices and articles on digital marketing, everything from SEO to developing content to social media, pretty much anything you want to know about digital marketing. And it is free as well. You just need to log in with your a Gmail account, and there's a password we provide, and then you're in and you can get access to all of this information. So be sure to check out the portal. It is, it's louisianatravel.com/industry, and it has all of those free resources there. So for today, we're really excited to welcome Brian Jewell, Group Travel Leader. He has some really great information to get ready for groups to return. I know this has been something that's been huge, obviously, for the industry, because how does group travel look? How do people even feel about it now? So Brian has a lot of great research information and some ideas about how to get a hold of this returning market as it manages to come back. So I'm going to pass it to Brian. If you have any questions, please pop them into the chat. We will revisit them at the end and go through any questions that come through.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. Guys, thanks so much for having me today. I love tourism. I love Louisiana. In fact, the last thing I got to do right before COVID shut everything down was a trip to Baton Rouge for Travel South last year. And I was supposed to be in the state a bunch more last year, and that didn't get to happen. But fortunately, most of those trips have been rescheduled for later this year, and I'm super optimistic that I will get to come back and spend some time with you guys in person. But until that's possible, I am thrilled to be here with you today. And I want to start just by kind of setting the scene a little bit. I want to take you back all the way to 2003 and share a story that I think is a great illustration of sort of the perception problem that group travel has been up against in general. And then we'll talk about how COVID has changed that and look at what the numbers are telling us and kind of get a game plan together for the rest of the year. So in 2003, I was a brand new travel journalist. I was just out of college and had just started working here for the Group Travel Leader. I knew almost nothing about the group tourism industry, but I was a decent writer, and some people here were willing to give me a shot. And so they sent me out on a research trip to Arkansas. This is going to be my first business trip, my first opportunity to write a travel piece. And the very first day I was with a girl who worked at the state who was taking me around, and we were at dinner with some people from the CVB we were visiting. And the guy from the CVB started asking me all these questions that I couldn't answer. Like, not only could I not answer them, but I didn't even understand the terms he was using. And I was so kind of like awkward and embarrassed by that situation that when I went back to the hotel that night with the girl from the state who was taking me around, I asked her if we could go sit in the bar for a couple hours and she could just tell me everything she knew about the group industry so that I could maybe not feel as embarrassed at the next dinner. And I was like 21 and she was like 23 or something. So in my mind, she was an expert. She was a veteran in the industry. And so this was the best resource I had to learn some things. So we're sitting in the bar, we're having drinks, and she said, well, I mean, I can tell you what I know about group travel, but honestly, this industry is dying. It's going to be gone in 5 years. And so like, I'm looking for a way out, and I suggest you find something else to do too, because, people just don't care about groups anymore. Group travelers are getting older. They're all dying. Younger people aren't going to travel. And so, it's best just to find something else to do. Now that was 2003. And I can tell you that that young lady didn't last very long in the tourism industry. So she was right in one respect that she was getting out, but she was completely wrong in another respect, which was that group travel was dying. I've got to tell you that in the 18 years since then, I have heard this refrain over and over and over and over. That group travel is dying, that nobody cares about groups anymore, the baby boomers won't get on a motor coach, that, all these things are going to happen. It's been doom and gloom for 18 years. The only problem is it has never, ever been true. In fact, I'm going to show you some figures in a minute that demonstrate how much the group travel business was continuing to thrive right up until the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And this is important because one of the things that I started hearing at the beginning of the pandemic was that groups were going to be the very last thing to bounce back, or even that the COVID pandemic was going to kill group travel once and for all. Now, if I hadn't been through 18 years of those kinds of prognostications before, I might have been a little more worried than I am. But here's the thing. We've heard this before and it's never been true. We heard it after 9/11. We heard it during the housing crash. We heard it during the SARS pandemic and the swine flu. And every time something goes wrong in travel, there are certain people that like to predict that it's going to be the end of the group travel industry, but it's never been true once. I don't believe it's true today. So I've got a lot of cool stuff to share with you that I think is going to help paint that picture and give us a roadmap toward recovery through the second half of this year. But let me just kind of lay the groundwork and tell you what we're going to talk about today. The first thing we're going to cover is the truth about group travel, where the industry actually stands, where it stood before COVID, where it stands now. We're going to look specifically at demand during the pandemic, and this is some brand new research from our organization that I think you're going to find really helpful. Then we're going to get into factors that are going to impact 2021 in a very specific way that you haven't had to deal with, or that you haven't had working in your favor in previous years, but that will actually work in your favor this year if you can position yourself to take advantage of them in a smart way. And then finally, I'm going to give you some tips about how to make the most of the opportunities that are coming your way in the second half of this year. So let's get started and take a look at the truth about group travel. Now, I'm going to lean on a couple of organizations that have done some really, really in-depth research to kind of give you a picture of the group tourism industry as it existed pre-COVID. Now, many of you know American Bus Association. They've done tons of great research. I'm going to refer to the last major study that they did before COVID. This was a study of the tourism industry in 2018. I want to highlight some things that they found about our industry. The first is that there were 236 million group tour visitors to destinations around North America in 2018. That is a huge number. It rivals the numbers that you would expect to see from individual or family travelers. It rivals the numbers that you would see from certain segments of the meetings and conventions market. Groups tend not to get much respect, but it is completely unearned, that reputation of not having much market impact, because we have an incredible amount of market impact, 236 million group tour passengers. Those people generated almost 80 million room nights in the US in 2018. 80 million room nights, nothing to sneeze at. That business generated a direct economic impact of more than $101 billion. It's hard for me to overstate how huge this is. Over $101 billion in direct economic impact. That's not going out to the second and third degree impacts and, extrapolating, well, each of these people, maybe they bought this one thing, and then when they bought that thing, then the store owner had to buy a new supply from somebody else. It's not that kind of, second and third degree impact. This is direct economic impact, direct spend from group travel customers in the places they visit. And we can translate that into specific destinations. What ABA found was that each motor coach group that came to a destination spent about $15,000 on the ground there. Now, I don't know about you, but most communities throughout the US would love to have a $15,000 spend from a motor coach group right now. So this just paints a picture of a really healthy industry all the way up to 2018. It was doing record levels of business, and even anecdotally, last year at the travel conferences at the ABA Marketplace, at the Travel South Domestic Showcase, up until the point that COVID shut things down, I was hearing over and over and over from tour operators and from destinations that they were on track to have their best year ever. So I say this just to reinforce that group travel is not dead. It is not dying. We were in a great and healthy place before COVID. I think we can get back there. Just another set of stats to drive that message home. This comes from the United States Tour Operators Association. This is an association of about 100 or so of the biggest and healthiest tour companies in the US. Here is some of what they found in a very similar survey that they did in 2018. First of all, in 2018, as they looked to 2019, 100% of the tour operators that are members of that association anticipated sales growth in 2019. And I would say, based on my conversations with many of those people early last year, that they got the growth in 19 that they were anticipating, and they were even expecting more growth for 2020. 56% of those operators expected more than 7%, 7 to 10% growth in 2019 over 2018. If you run a business, you know that year-over-year growth of 7 to 10% is pretty huge, and it's definitely something worth celebrating. Finally, 58% of those tour operators planned to increase staff in 2019, and I believe a lot of them did that. So we know now that those are sort of boom times. That's kind of the threshold, the benchmark for what is the best year ever. What can we hope to get back to as we work on a recovery for this industry. But it's really important to use that as our benchmark and not get caught up in all the hype that says, oh, groups are dying, groups are never going to come back, groups weren't successful before COVID happened, because it's absolutely not true. The group tourism industry is a viable industry. It was a thriving industry as recently as like 13 months ago. And I believe really strongly that we're going to get back there. So let's talk about what demand looks like today and how demand for group travel has worked sort of throughout the entire pandemic. Now, like everyone else, group customers are eager to travel. And you know what kind of grinds my gears a little bit is that all the people who have been saying, oh, groups are never going to come back, well, they didn't say that about any other segment of the travel industry. Nobody has said, oh, family travel is never going to come back. They've never said, the travel agents are never going to come back. They've never said that cruises aren't going to come back, even though cruising has been absolutely dead for a year. No cruise ship has been able to depart from a US port in a year. They didn't say that about meetings and conventions. They haven't said it about any other segment of the travel industry, because we know inherently that people love to travel. We know that there is pent-up demand, and there's no reason why that shouldn't be true for groups the same way it's true for you as an individual, you and your spouse, you and your family, you and your friends that you love to travel with. It's true in all those other circumstances. It's true of business travel. It's true of group travel as well. So I'm going to show you the results of a survey that we just finished. We ran the survey in like the second and third week of February, and we went out to our readership, which consists of professional tour operators, volunteer travel planners for lots of organizations such as churches, community groups, schools, teachers, people that plan travel for banks, university alumni groups, chambers of commerce. We had travel agents that plan for groups respond to this as well. We got about 275 participants in this survey, which is huge. In fact, I think that makes this the biggest and most authoritative survey of the group travel buyers anywhere in our industry since the beginning of the pandemic. Now, we've done 2 or 3 different versions of this survey since the pandemic began, and have been able to track how some demand and interest has evolved over time. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but let's just jump into these survey questions and talk specifically about what the results were.
Wilma needs to turn her video off.
So the first question, when do you expect?
Wilma needs to turn her video off. She's very distracting.
Okay, yeah, somebody's popping in to say that people that with video or audio on are somewhat distracting. So if you don't mind, guys, to just kill your video and mute your audio, and if you have a question, put it in the chat, and Jen will take care of that as we wrap up. So anyway, back into our survey. The first question we asked, which is the question on everybody's mind, was this: when do you expect your next group trip to depart? So there are 5% of people who said we are operating trips now. These are the rock-ribbed, brave people. You might think of them as COVID deniers. I don't know if they're all deniers, but they are not scared enough about COVID that they stopped traveling, and they had travelers that wanted to go out with them. So that's what they did. These people are operating trips now, 5%. We had 17% that said they expect to operate a trip in spring of 2021, sometime over the next 3 months. Then a quite large contingent said summer of 2021, that's 23%. Of course, the biggest response was from people that said they expected to operate a trip in fall of 2021, 31% said that. And then we have a sizable group that said, we're not going anywhere until winter of 2022 or later. That's 24%. Now, it's important to say again that this survey was completed about 3 weeks ago, second and third week of February. And I don't have any way of proving this, but I feel kind of intuitively like if we were to run this survey again today, that the numbers would be a little bit different, that we might see more people saying we're going in spring or summer or even fall, and we'd see fewer people saying we're going in winter of next year or later. And that's because the news surrounding COVID has just been so relentlessly positive over the past 3 or 4 weeks. Infection rates are plummeting, test positivity rates are plummeting, hospitalizations and deaths are plummeting. We're vaccinating over 2 million people a day. The news is just getting better and better. And so these data, even though they're very new, they're already a little bit dated because the situation is changing so fast. I think if we ran this again today, we'd find an even more positive outlook. Some key takeaways from this question on the timeline. There is some trend sensitivity. And what I mean by that is people who plan group travel and take group trips are sensitive to trends in the world. They're sensitive to what they see in the media. The reason I say that is this. We asked a very similar question back in September around Labor Day. Now, if you can remember back to September of last year, we had gone through the initial pandemic lockdown quarantine period where everything stopped, and then numbers went down, or they seemed to be going down, and the early summer looked really, really good. And we all thought, oh, we might be done with this. And then around July, August, things started peaking again. We hit a peak that was higher than where we were initially, and people kind of pulled back in and said, well, maybe we need to wait a little. There's this, this second wave. We thought that was the second wave. And then things stabilized a bit into August and September, and we asked this question around that time when things stabilized, and we had a relatively stable fall between that summer peak and then when things started to get nuts, and a real true second wave happened in the autumn and into the holiday season. So when we asked that question in September, we had 20% of people say, we're taking trips now. But when we asked that question again in February, after that big peak that happened in infections in the late fall and into the holidays, the number went down from 20% who said we're traveling now, only down to 5%. Now, some of that may just be due to the seasonal nature of travel. Fewer groups travel in the winter months than travel in the fall. We all know that. But I think a lot more of it is due to trend sensitivity. Everybody had their eyes on the news. Everybody saw what was going on with cases. Everybody knew people at home who were contracting COVID. And so the travel market responded to that in the way you would expect. The numbers of people who are traveling now really took a nosedive. And so it's important to note that people are sensitive to what they hear in the media, and that is true of groups just as it is any other segment of the industry. Something else, though, that is really worth mentioning is that 45% of group travelers expect to be traveling by summer. That could mean as soon as 3 months from now. And compared to last year when virtually nobody was traveling in summer, that is a big point of growth. Of course, if we widen it out even further, we're anticipating a big fall rebound, somewhere around 75% of people traveling by year's end, based on data from 3 weeks ago. And if current trends continue the way they're going, I think we could see even more than 75% of groups back on the road before the end of the year. In other words, there is a rebound coming, and it's coming in the next 6 to 9 months. So it's really incumbent on us to be ready for it so that we can start getting back to the prosperous industry that we all remember and that we all hope to live in again. So I want to take you to the second question we asked, which was this. Which of these statements best describes your group trips for 2021? Now, we gave people the option to choose more than one answer here, so that you'll notice that the totals add up to more than 100%. But these are the kinds of trips that people have planned for 2021. The vast majority, 71%, said their trips for 21 are trips that were planned for last year that got rescheduled or postponed. And one of the quote unquote success stories from the pandemic is how many groups chose to roll over their trips, postpone their trips, leave their money on deposit with tour operators or cruise lines, and just say, we're going to take this trip whenever we get to take the trip. And so a lot of them are planning to take those trips this year that they didn't get to take last year. Now, another 22% said that they are taking trips this year that they planned before the pandemic happened. These are things that they were planning in 2019, early 2020. The pandemic didn't deter them from keeping those trips on the books. So about a fifth of groups are planning on doing some of that travel this year. Another 43% said that they are going to take new trips that they have scheduled since the pandemic began. That's really interesting to me, especially in the context of this doom and gloom industry where people have been saying, oh, group travel is going to die. Well, if group travel was dying, if COVID was going to kill this industry, then why are 43% of groups planning on taking new trips that they put on the books since the beginning of the pandemic? I think that's really interesting to note. And then there was about 9% that had an other response. We're going to look at some of their responses here in a minute because they're interesting to say the least. Now, some key takeaways from that data. First of all, there is unfinished business. As I said, lots of people are rolling their trips from last year over to this year. And again, that's a really strong indicator that demand for travel hasn't gone anywhere. People still want to take the trips that they were dreaming about in 2020. They plan to do that in 2021. So if you had some groups that were coming to you last year that canceled, you may still be able to get them. And if you haven't stayed in touch with those tour operators or group leaders, I really urge you to do that because you could pick up some of that unfinished business and that can be part of your rebound story for this year. The other thing that's so interesting, as I mentioned, is that people are planning new trips. You know, it happened to all of us. We were sitting around at home for weeks or months, depending how long your personal quarantine period lasted, sitting around at home, maybe not with much to do, just dreaming about the day when you could get out and travel again. And so savvy group leaders were able to seize on that pent-up demand that was building during quarantine and use it as a catalyst to get people interested and on board on new trips that they hadn't already planned. 43% did that, and that is such a strong indicator of the demand that grew in the minds and the hearts of travelers while they weren't able to travel. And then finally, it's always worth noting that group travel usually involves some long lead times. We said there were about 21% that were planning on taking a trip this year that they originally scheduled before the pandemic even began. That's always important to keep in mind as you do your marketing and promoting, as you go to conferences, as you reach out to travel planners. Some of these people are working 12 months, 18 months in advance, and the pandemic didn't stop that. So group travel always has a long lead time. You need to factor that in to your plans. Now, I want to look at some of the unique comments we got from people when we gave them an open response to this question, because they really reveal some things about the mindset of travel planners right now and what they feel like they're up against. So here's something that one traveler said about the hassle of COVID travel. They said, I will wait to plan trips when things are open up for groups without all of the restrictions that will hinder the quality of the trip. So for this person, the lack of travel right now is not about being scared of getting sick. It's not about thinking nobody's going to sign up for a trip during the pandemic. It's about the quality of life that they're going to have on the road. They don't want to mess with travel while there are restrictions in place. That's good to know. Here's something that somebody else said about what they have encountered in trying to plan trips for this year, the constantly changing rules that made that really, really hard to do. This person said some trips are constantly rescheduled due to erratic destination restrictions. Some destinations, they named a destination here and I have omitted that just to keep everything anonymous, but they said some destinations invite people to visit and then put restrictions in place the day groups arrive. Many destinations welcome visitors. We have groups traveling internationally with testing before boarding flights, and this has worked great. Memories are being made in new destinations, and other places are going to suffer into the future because of the way the pandemic has been handled with last-minute changes that cause trips to cancel. Now listen, I know a lot of the decisions are being made at a level that's high above your heads. It's being made by your governor, it might be made by your local health department or other local authorities, but it is worth you noting that when you change the rules on these group travel planners, it makes them really difficult to complete the trips they want to complete. So keep that in mind as we go into this sort of messy middle to ending part of the pandemic, when it's going to be really easy to change rules or not know what's going on. That if there's confusion in your destination, it's going to create confusion in the minds of your potential travelers. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Here's something somebody said about public perception. They said travel shaming on social media as well as major television networks is affecting whether or not people will travel. So here's a group leader who has her finger on the pulse of what her travelers want. They're not worried about getting sick. They're not worried about the restrictions. What they're worried about is just people travel shaming them. Man, what a sad situation that is for all of us. So anyway, let's move on to the next question in this survey. We asked, which of these statements best describes the current mindset of your customers or members? And this was specifically surrounding when they would be ready to travel. So here were some of the options we gave them. Again, they could choose more than one option. So you'll see totals that add up to more than 100%. 40% said, I'm tired of being home and I'm ready to travel now, regardless of what the situation is in the world, regardless of whether COVID is spiking or going down. I'm tired of being home. I'm ready to travel now. Bring it on. The vast majority, 69%, said they have people in their group that are cautious about COVID-19, but will be ready to travel once they've been vaccinated. Listen, if you don't take away anything else from this research, take this away. People will travel once they've been vaccinated, regardless of what the CDC recommends, regardless of what governors say, regardless of what Fauci says. The public has made it pretty clear. Once they are vaccinated, they're hitting the road. Another 39% said they're concerned about COVID-19 and they're going to wait to stay put until the pandemic is over. Now, again, I can't prove this, but I do feel intuitively like if we were to run this survey again today, that 39% might be lower. There's more and more acceptance of the vaccine than there ever has been. And as infection rates continue to plunge, I think public opinion is going to change. Finally, we had 7% that said there was some other status, and I'll share some of their open responses with you here in a minute. Now, key takeaways from this question. On COVID caution, there are a few people who are throwing caution to the wind. There are that 40%. Some of them might be COVID deniers. Some of them are people who have just had it and they say, I don't care if I get sick. I can't live this way anymore. I want to travel. That 40% is a sizable amount. When you add to it the most who say vaccines are going to tip the scale, then what we end up with is a lot of people who are going to be eligible to travel here within the next few months. There are some people who say, I'm not taking any chances. Now, these might be people who are elderly. They might have pre-existing conditions. Maybe they are just more cautious people in general, and they're not going to go anywhere until Dr. Fauci says, okay, it's over. But it's important to note that there is a huge percentage of people who are going to be eligible to travel and have the desire to travel as this vaccine rollout continues. Now, depending on how well we continue to do with vaccines, I mean, the president has said he thinks we can get everybody vaccinated by the end of May. I'm sure that's optimistic, but if it happens, it means anybody who wants to travel could realistically be back out on the road by like June or July. That is hugely exciting for me. I hope it is for you as well. Now let's take a look at some of these responses from people who had another answer. One person just had some thoughts on the importance of travel. They said people need to escape and travel is the escape. With proper testing and protocols, travel should be more consistent. Travel restrictions match the politics of the state and city. Politicians are still getting paid. It's the people that suffer. It's incredibly disappointing that we can't support the places we love because of the varying restrictions. Now, we all know that COVID has been politicized over the past 12 months, and that's a shame in many ways. It was probably inevitable in many ways, but it's incumbent on those of us that work in travel to continue communicating with our political leaders to make sure they understand how important it is that we get back to work and that the travel demand is there to support it. Another person had some things to say on traveling quietly. I thought this was interesting. She said that some are traveling, but they do not talk about it. Probably because of the travel shaming that somebody else mentioned. And finally, somebody else had some thoughts on public messaging. They said, when the media backs off on the COVID negative drama, people will gradually adjust and the vaccine will help. Now, maybe you think that COVID is the disaster of the millennium. Maybe you think it was completely blown out of proportion by the media. Reasonable people can disagree on that, but it is worth noting that people are sensitive to what they see in the media. So the more we see good news coming out, the more people are going to be ready to travel. And I would urge you, if you're involved in public relations or messaging for your organization at all, start getting good news out, because good news really does affect people. It's going to help turn the tide. Let's move on to the last question of this survey. Which of these statements best describes your members' attitudes toward COVID-19 vaccines? You know, this is the golden question really for society in general, is how many people are going to be willing to be vaccinated? That number changes pretty constantly. It's been going up and up, which public health experts tell us is what we need to see. But I was interested to know specifically how potential travelers answered this question. And so we had group leaders and tour operators answer on their behalf. Here's what we found. 69% said they are eager to get the vaccine or have already started getting vaccinated. I believe that's higher than the number of the general population that say they're eager to be vaccinated. This is really, really, really good news for travel's recovery. 69% are eager to get the vaccine, have already started getting vaccinated. At this point, many of them have probably completed both rounds, which is really good news. Another 17% said they're ambivalent about the vaccine, but will probably get it if it's required for travel. There's been a lot of discussion about requiring vaccination for travel, and we can't require people to get vaccinated on a population level, but airlines, cruise lines, tour companies have considered possibly requiring people to be vaccinated at some point in the future in order to take advantage of their services. An additional 17% have said they'll probably do it if it's required for travel. Now, there are the lone few holdouts, 2%, that say they're unwilling to be vaccinated, even if that means they're not allowed to travel for a while. These people have health concerns. They're concerned about how quickly the vaccines were developed, or maybe the thought that they weren't tested thoroughly enough. Again, reasonable people can disagree about that, but I think it's interesting to note what the percentage is of potential travelers, likely travelers, compared to the percentage of the overall population, because I think population level, many more than 2% of people are saying they're unwilling to be vaccinated. So people that love travel, that want to travel, by and large, are willing to be vaccinated in order to make that happen. Now, we did have another 12% that gave an other response. There's some interesting notes in there. We'll hit those in a second. So key takeaways on vaccines. Number one is widespread acceptance among travelers. As I said, that is really, really good news for us. And as this rollout continues, more than 2 million people a day being vaccinated, we're seeing 2 million potential travelers enter the market that weren't there a day ago. So that's really important to know. This is changing so quickly, and we're making great strides to where we want to be. Requirements. If you require a vaccine, it's going to have a moderate impact on the number of people that take it. We can't require a vaccine on a population level, but if there are requirements in place for people to be vaccinated in order to travel on an airliner, a cruise liner, etc., then it's going to moderately increase the number of people who take it. It's not a huge increase. It's a 17% increase. But by and large, the most important thing to take away here is that there are right now a fair number of customers, and day by day we're growing more and more in the number of eligible and interested customers who want to travel and who feel safe to travel. And by the summer, there's going to be plenty of customers to start putting them on buses and sending them back out on tours. We don't need 100% of potential customers to be comfortable with traveling or to have been vaccinated. We just need enough to make it viable to get buses out on the road again. And I think that's going to happen sooner rather than later. Now let's get back to some of those interesting quotes that people had to share on the open response. Somebody had this to say on vaccine uptake. 50% are getting the vaccine, 50% will travel without the vaccine. Now, if we see requirements put in place, that's going to change things, but half and half is an interesting ratio, and that probably tracks a little bit more with what we're seeing on population level studies of vaccine acceptance. Another person had something more to say on requiring vaccination. This person said their travelers may get the vaccine if it's required for travel, but only when necessary. So if it isn't required everywhere, they could avoid it. Now, this points to the potential for people to make decisions about travel based on when and where vaccines are required. So some people may choose to go to places or may choose types of travel where they have some wiggle room where they're not going to be asked to show proof of vaccination. That's really interesting for policymakers and for people who are promoting domestic travel and motor coach travel, where it's much harder to require proof of vaccination. Finally, on vaccine decision making, somebody said this. It's a mixture of all the above, people who are eager for it, people who are ambivalent about it, people who don't want it. But most people don't want to be forced to be vaccinated to travel. They want it to be a choice just like all other vaccines. So there's an element of people out there who are saying, hey, it's my life, it's my body, it's my choice. Let me make that for myself. Don't push this on me in order to be able to get out there and travel. So that is a look at demand during the pandemic. I know I threw a lot of numbers at you. So let's move away from the numbers now and start looking at some of the unique factors in 2021 that are actually going to work in favor of group travel this year. These are special cases. They weren't true in 2019. They may not be true in 2022, but they're true in 2021. And so as a savvy travel promoter, you need to pivot to take advantage of these things. Factors working in your favor. Number one, borders are closed. Now, you can still go to Mexico, for instance, but you can't go to Canada right now. Most of Europe is off limits to American travelers. So are many, many other countries. What this means is that a lot of people who have money to travel, who have cabin fever, who have interest in travel, those people who may have gone to Europe, who may have gone to Canada, who may have gone somewhere else, they can't go there. They got to go somewhere. They are going to travel domestically, and that is good news for you. Closed borders, they're not going to be closed forever. They could be closed well into 2021. Hopefully they're open by 2022. But for right now, you have domestic travelers at your fingertips that you didn't have before because they were more interested in traveling internationally. Next, cruises right now are going nowhere. The cruise lines and the CDC are still in this dance to try to see if they can figure out some modifications and best practices that would allow cruises to cruise and people to still feel healthy about it. They've been working on that for a year. They still haven't got there. And there are other factors that make this complicated. So as of right now, cruises aren't going anywhere. And so millions and millions of people who love to cruise are going to be looking for a land vacation instead. That bodes well for you. Now, I know that there are some domestic, or not domestic, but there are some Caribbean cruises that go out of New Orleans. So you may miss out on some of the traffic from those pre-departure or post-arrival visitors. But in general, the fact that cruises aren't going is good news for domestic travel destinations, especially inland destinations. Next, the silver wave. I heard this phrase the other day, and I think it is so perceptive. By silver wave, we mean this. Older people are going to be your best bet for travel right now. People said early on in the pandemic that groups wouldn't come back or would be the last to come back because older people were the most vulnerable and older people would be the most cautious about getting back on the road. But a funny thing happens on the way to herd immunity, and that's that the older people got vaccinated first. So they're the ones that feel safe. They're the ones that want to travel. They're the ones that are going to start traveling now. Another interesting thing that has happened demographically is that older people, baby boomers, actually have less concern about their personal risk of contracting COVID or getting seriously ill from COVID than millennials do. And it's way out of balance with what the science actually tells us the risk levels are for people of different ages. But millennials are more scared of getting COVID and more scared of being seriously sick from COVID in relation to their actual risk than boomers are. So you might see boomers coming first. You're going to see people in their 60s, in their 70s, maybe some in their 80s who have been vaccinated. They're ready to get out there. And some other things contribute to this. They're least likely to have lost any income during quarantine, during shutdowns, during the widespread unemployment, because they are more likely to already be retired. So they didn't lose any income. And they're most likely to have a lot of their assets in the stock market. And if you follow the markets, you know that miraculously the markets have continued to do really well throughout the COVID period. So they didn't lose income. They did well in the stock market. They've got time on their hands. They've been vaccinated. They're ready to go. A silver wave is coming. These are the people who are the best customers for group tours, and they're going to be ready to travel just as soon as you are ready to welcome them. That's a really good thing. Next up, People want to take short trips. We're hearing that more and more and more. There are tour operators who want to get back into the game, but they don't want to take the risk of putting together a week-long trip. They want to try their hands at a day trip, an overnight, maybe a long weekend. In addition, a longer trip that crosses multiple state lines and might subject the groups to different regulations as they go from state to state, that is a headache for travel planners. They're concerned about those regulations that were so widely publicized at the beginning of the COVID period. So they're going to be looking for short trips that's maybe in state or one state over, things they can do in a day or two. That can work in your favor if you package it right. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Finally, there is confusion in the marketplace. This started last spring when each state was imposing different levels of quarantine and restrictions. We heard on the news that you can't go into this state or that state without quarantining for 2 weeks. And it was different from state to state. Some states were wide open. Some states didn't have any restrictions. Some states had massive restrictions. Some states changed their restrictions almost week to week. It was so overwhelming for travel planners. We heard that over and over really throughout 2020. Every time we talked to travel planners, they were overwhelmed and confused by all these restrictions in the marketplace. Now, a lot of that has kind of quietly fallen to the wayside. The problem is our industry has not done a great job of communicating what's allowed now, what people can do now. As a result, there's still a lot of marketplace confusion. And as we heard from that one travel planner, they said, we haven't done trips yet, not because our people aren't ready, not because we're scared. We haven't done it because we're not sure where we can go. That's a real issue. It's something we need to address. But if we can address it, we can turn that as a factor into our favor. So these are special things you need to be thinking about in 2021. They're not going to be relevant next year. You're not going to get an opportunity like this in the future. So let's take advantage of it now. So last thing I want to give you is kind of a roadmap for making the most of opportunity. These are some strategic moves to benefit from the coming 2021 comeback. Now, I don't mean to be glib about this. I'm not trying to say that 2021 is going to be your best year ever. Last year was awful, and this year can be a lot less awful, and maybe next year can start being great again. But if you don't make the most of the opportunity that is going to present itself this year, I'm afraid your 2021 could still be pretty crappy. I don't want that for you. I think you can have a moderate 2021, which given the world we live in right now, that's a success. And if you can even have a more than moderate, if you can have a decent or good 2021, that's better for all of us. So I want to give you 4 key strategies for making the most of the opportunity, taking action now to make sure you don't miss out on the 2021 comeback. I want to be clear about this. If you don't do these things, you could miss out on this comeback. There is latent demand in the marketplace. There is pent-up demand. There is a growing and growing group of eligible travelers that want to get out there, but we got to meet them where they are. We got to pivot and make some good decisions and help them get their trips put together and help them come visit us. If we don't do it, we're going to miss out on that 2021 comeback, and somebody else is going to get the business that you should be getting instead. So let's talk about how we take action to make sure that doesn't happen. First of all, you need to refine your messaging. You need to communicate that you're open, and you need to focus on what's possible and positive. In my work as a travel journalist, I'm on CVB and attraction websites. I probably like 30, 40 different websites a day. Can I tell you how tired I am of the pop-up or the red banner or the big blinking light that says COVID-19 information? Look, that messaging needs to go away. And I know that's a controversial statement. You can disagree with me and we can still be friends. But look, everybody knows about COVID-19. Everybody knows about the steps that are being taken. Everybody knows there's a mask mandate. Everybody knows they need to wash their hands and carry hand sanitizer. We need to get off that messaging and get on messaging about what is possible and what is positive. Your messaging needs to be, we are open. Your messaging needs to be, you can come here. You are not limited to a group of 10 people. You're not limited to a group of 15. You will not be forced to quarantine when you come. We have hotels ready for you. We have restaurants with private rooms and tables spread out where you can eat your group meal in a socially distanced way. We have done the hard work of making sure that you can travel in a way that makes you feel safe. The tourism industry as a whole has not done a good enough job of getting this message out there. there. And there are other messages we've been working on. There's been plenty of, government relations and lobbying and other things that have been important. I understand. But if you want to get a piece of this 2021 comeback, you have got to refine your messaging specifically to groups, to tour operators. Be crystal clear with them that you are open, that restrictions aren't going to hold them back, that there are no quarantines, there are no capacity limits, and that they can do business now. The next thing you need to do is rebuild your itineraries. Group itineraries, suggested itineraries, sample itineraries are so helpful for travel planners. But if you have not rebuilt your itineraries in the age of COVID, all the information on your website, the things that people might want to look at, they don't know if it's accurate. They don't know if the attractions or the hotels or restaurants that you've listed there are still in business. If you are an attraction and you have a sample group package on your website, or maybe you can package with a restaurant nearby, maybe you provide food service yourself, travel planners don't know if you're still doing that. They don't know that you're still in business. They don't know if they can still have a meal there. They don't know what works and what doesn't work. So you need to rebuild itineraries now, 2021 itineraries. And I want you to optimize these for short trips and things that groups can do without restrictions this year. So on these new itineraries that you build and start to promote to groups, it doesn't need to be about, normally we'd have you go to this museum, but it's closed. If the museum is closed, take them off the itinerary, put another attraction or experience on the itinerary. And really, these itineraries need to be dynamic over the next 12 months because things are going to change. Hotels or restaurants may open and close. Attractions may open for groups or close for groups. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. So you can't rely on the itineraries that you built 3 years ago, even the ones that you built at the beginning of the pandemic, because things have changed so much. So you need to rebuild them, you need to optimize them for short trips, and you need to really highlight what groups can do this year without restriction. Don't get bogged down in the restrictions because we're all so tired of hearing about it. The third thing I want you to do is rehire your salespeople. Listen, I know it was brutal. 2020 was brutal. You lost 90% of your income. As an organization. You lost your hotel occupancy tax. You lost most of your funding. I get it. You had to let your group salespeople go. I get it. I'm not mad at you. But here's the thing about the group travel industry. It is 100% built on relationships. Tour operators and travel planners want to take trips with people they have relationships with. They don't want to have to guess, who do I call in this city in order to know whether I can come or not? Who do I need to call to see about getting hotel quotes? They want to work with the people that they've known for years, and they want to work with people that understand groups, because tour groups are a different animal than meetings and conventions. They're a different animal than incentives. They're a different animal than weddings. So if you're serious about getting groups back, and you want to get in on this 2021 comeback, you need to rehire your salespeople. You need to bring back your group travel specialists and let them do what they're best at, because they know the tour operators to call. They know the words to say. They know the kind of conversation to have. They know who is conservative and who is liberal in the way they think. They know who is anxious to get back out on the road and who might be ready to close up shop for good. They have the relationships and they can leverage those to make travel happen this year. I've said this throughout the COVID pandemic, and I stand by it. Once things are ready to open, and it looks like that time is going to come sooner rather than later. Once things are ready to open, if you don't get groups coming back to your destination within a few months, it's not because groups are dead. It's because you fired your group salesperson and you didn't bring them back. If you want groups, you need to have that salesperson on staff doing what they do best. And finally, you need to restart your promotion. You need to invest in advertising and PR now to reach travel planners during the research phase. Remember, we talked about group travel being a long lead time business. Some trips are planned 12 to 18 months in advance. Right now, I think there's a window to hit that 3 to 6 month lead time, because a lot of people are realizing day by day the travel is almost possible, that it's coming soon, and that there's pent-up demand, and that they can make a trip happen this summer or this fall. If you want to hit those people, you got to hit them now with advertising, with marketing, with PR, with sales blitzes. Whatever you do to promote group travel, you need to start doing it now. If you think in March of 2021 the way you thought in March of 2020, which is, we're still in a pandemic, I don't know who I can talk to, I don't know what I can say, it's inappropriate to talk about travel now, you're going to miss it. And I don't mean to be the heavy. I don't mean to come down on you hard, but this is the facts as I see them. If you are hesitant, if you have a pandemic mindset over the next 3 months, you and your organization are going to miss out on the comeback. Listen, I know we're still in a pandemic. I know we're still all wearing masks. I know there's a way to go until, as a society, we're 100% out of this thing. But as a travel marketer, you need to start thinking like COVID is over. I'm going to say that again. As a travel marketer, you need to start thinking like COVID is over. Because if you're still thinking like we're in a pandemic, you're going to be selling like we're in a pandemic, which means you're not going to be selling. That's not what I want to see for you. So that's what I got for you guys today. I would love to hear your questions or your thoughts, or know what else I can do to help you make the most of the coming rebound in the group travel industry.
Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to throw those into the chat and we'll run through anything that y'all want to know more about. Not seeing any come through.
All right.
Maybe we don't have any. We were very thorough. I'm going to be, as I mentioned, I'm going to be taking this recording and getting it up on our industry portal for everybody that that could not make it, and anybody that you guys that did want to share it with. If after watching this today, you know of some partners that you really think need to see this, we're going to get the recording up and it will be available to stream and revisit and refresh yourself on anything. So keep an eye out for that. Again, our industry portal is louisianatravel.com/industry. And be sure to check out all of our other upcoming webinars and educational opportunities that we have there as well. Everybody have a great day. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, guys.